Stories this hour. Local hospitals say at least 25 Palestinians sheltering in tents or queuing for food aid were killed by Israeli strikes and shootings today. It comes as UN-backed monitor formally confirms famine in Gaza City, prompting global pleas for Israel to halt its 22-month offensive. Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba and South Korean President Lee Jae-myung agreed to strengthen security and economic cooperation during Lee's first official visit to Tokyo. The talks come ahead of Lee's summit with US President Donald Trump on Monday, as the three allies look to deepen coordination under their trilateral pact. Hundreds of National Guard troops were spotted on the National Mall posing for selfies and mingling with tourists, despite it being one of the city's safest areas in Washington, D.C. City leaders say the move is more about President Trump showing force than fighting crime, with some troops doubting they'll see any action. Ghislaine Maxwell, the convicted associate of Jeffrey Epstein, has told US officials that a much-rumoured client list does not exist. She also said she never saw misconduct by Donald Trump or Bill Clinton, dismissed claims against Prince Andrew as not conceivable, and is seeking a pardon while accused of lying to investigators. Israel's military says a missile fired from Yemen most likely broke apart mid-air after triggering air raid sirens across the country. Yemen's Houthi rebels claimed responsibility, saying they launched 3 operations, including a ballistic missile aimed at Ben Gurion Airport near Tel Aviv. Portugal's president confirms a firefighter has died while battling blazes in Subugal, the 4th fatality in the country's wildfire emergency this summer. President Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa offered condolences to the family, praising his sacrifice in the fight against the devastating forest fires. Former Brexit campaigner and Reform UK leader Nigel Farage says his party would launch mass deportations of migrants arriving by small boats if it forms the next government. He told The Times he would pull Britain out of the European Convention on Human Rights and strike deals with countries like Afghanistan and Eritrea for returns. France has summoned Italy's ambassador after Deputy Prime Minister Matteo Salvini dismissed President Emmanuel Macron's calls to deploy European soldiers in post-war Ukraine, telling him to, quote, get lost. A French diplomat source confirmed the summons, marking a new flashpoint in Paris-Rome relations. We start this hour in West Asia, where, according to local hospitals, at least 25 people were killed in Gaza today as Israeli strikes and shootings targeted civilians, including families seeking food and shelter, according to reports from the ground. Hospitals also report heavy casualties among women and children, and residents say no part of Gaza is safe. This comes as a UN-backed body has confirmed Gaza is facing a severe famine caused by Israeli restrictions on humanitarian aid. Over 500,000 people risk starvation as food and supplies are blocked at borders. This is from said report. UN officials warn the famine is preventable and call for an immediate ceasefire and unhindered aid access. The crisis is projected to worsen, spreading to Deir al-Bala and Khan Yunis, with over 640,000 people at catastrophic risk by September. Israel calls the famine report a lie and continues its preparations to seize Gaza City. Ground operations are already underway in key areas, while negotiations over hostages and a possible ceasefire await Israel's next steps. We are now joined by Ross Feingold, who is a political analyst. He joins us live from Taipei in Taiwan. Ross, some more figures there. Today's figures: 25 people killed, according 2 hospitals on the ground. Your reaction to this? Of course, the reports are saying that these people have been killed in camps while sheltering, whilst displaced, and also while seeking aid. These are continued reports we're getting continuously, day after day. Your response to this?
Prime Minister Netanyahu seems generally immune to the criticism from the international community about civilian deaths in the course of Israel's military operations. At the same time, and I think it's been becoming increasingly clear over the past few months, the Israeli government and Prime Minister Netanyahu, they do seem sensitive to criticism, especially from Western countries like countries in Europe, about the civilian death toll and about the civilian hunger. But they're weighing that against their military imperatives. And it's clear that at the moment that Prime Minister Netanyahu is going to prioritize military needs over humanitarian needs, despite the growing international criticism.
Yes, Ross, and also on the table, which we haven't mentioned, is a deal which has been accepted by Hamas, which was accepted by Israel a month ago. It will see a 60-day ceasefire in fighting and also return of half the hostages back to Israel, 20 of which Israel believes to be alive. What's stopping Israel from accepting that deal?
Certainly, there's a lot of domestic political pressure in Israel for Netanyahu to accept this deal. The challenge for Netanyahu is he has members of his coalition, including members of his cabinet, who refuse to accept this deal and/or take the view that any deal should be temporary in nature and it shouldn't be a permanent agreement or any indication that Israel is willing to end the war. In other words, there's still a strong voice in the current Israeli government, and frankly, Netanyahu is partial to this view, that says we have to defeat Hamas militarily. So we could agree to a ceasefire, it could be temporary, it could be 30 days or 60 days, but this view among members of the Israeli government is we cannot give up our ability or our right to defeat Hamas militarily. You know, one of the interesting things or even challenges about that view is when the war began in October 2023, I think most observers expected that Israel would be able to defeat Hamas within a relatively short period of time. And very few people thought that the war would go on for nearly 2 years and that Israel, despite its extraordinary military capability, would not be able to defeat Hamas yet.
Ross, of course, we're all seeing this crisis unfold online with images strewn all over social media. Netanyahu, of course, blames the social media algorithms for Israel losing the PR war. He also calls the famine a lie and continues the preparations to seize Gaza City, given condemnation of international allies. Long term, what do you think the effects are going to be on Israel, even after this war ends? Do you think that this is going to affect Israel diplomatically and, of course, its long-term image on the world stage?
That really remains to be seen. There's so much that is unknown about how this war will end and what will come after the war ends, or as often is called the day after. Who would rule Gaza? Is it going to be Israel's military? Is it going to be a coalition of Arab countries or some other governance model? This is just unknown, and it's not known because the war isn't over and Hamas has not been militarily defeated yet. There's growing calls in Europe to change the trade relationship with Israel. So far, most European leaders are resistant to take that step, notwithstanding their growing willingness to criticize Israel. But ultimately, Israel's most important security partner is the United States. And the Trump administration, generally speaking, is going to remain a firm supporter of Israel's policies.
Ross Feingold, thank you very much for joining us. Pleasure to have you, and thank you for taking the time. We now move over to Europe now, and Russia has announced that its forces have taken control of multiple settlements in eastern Ukraine, claiming to have captured 9 locations in Donetsk and Dnipropetrovsk between the August the 16th and the 22nd. The Russian Ministry of Defense also reported 6 cluster strikes using precision weapons and drones targeting Ukrainian defense factories, energy facilities, oil refineries, and ammunition depots. Ukraine, however, says it successfully repelled several offensives, engaging in 107 combats along the front line on August the 22nd, including 30 attacks in the Potrovsk direction, with 3 battles still ongoing. On Ukraine's Flag Day, President Volodymyr Zelensky reaffirmed the country's commitment to territorial integrity, highlighting the flag as a symbol of hope and resilience for Ukrainians in occupied territories. He praised the courage of soldiers defending all of Ukraine, honoured the fallen with a moment of silence, and concluded with a message of unity and strength. Russian troops have taken the Klabenbizk and Sardin areas near where they broke through the Ukrainian defences last week, as well as the Novogeorgivka in Dnipropetrovsk. These areas, previously spared from fighting until July, show Russia's continued push and claims of territorial gains despite ongoing peace efforts. We're now joined by Keith Vaz. He's a former UK minister and he joins us live from Atlanta. Thank you very much, Keith, as always, for joining us here on the program. Keith, Russia's narrative is that these occupied zones are part of their territory and that certain residents here, most residents here, in fact, all residents, according to Russia, want to be part of Russia. These are particularly parts of the Russian-speaking areas. What is your response to that?
I'm back in London, by the way, Thomas.
Apologies.
So, good on. It's all right. You didn't know that. You don't know my travel plans. Welcome to London. Look, Russia has always, this is the basis upon which Russia started its move against Ukraine, that actually what you're dealing with here from the time of the invasion of Crimea is Russian-speaking people who want to be part of Russia. The assertion by President Putin that this has always been part of Russia, that it should be part of Russia, and that local people want it to be part of Russia. So he's just reiterating the point that he probably made to President Trump when they met a week ago in Alaska, that this actually has always belonged to them. So therefore, why are people making a fuss about this? This is theirs, these are their people, and they are just reclaiming what belongs to Russia. So that's a position he's always had. Reasserting it now, unfortunately, shows what seems to be the failure of the Alaska summit. I think all of us in the world prayed and hoped that that would be a success, that it would be followed very rapidly by a summit between President Trump, President Zelensky, and President Putin, or at the very least, President Putin and President Zelensky. But it didn't. And I think that's a big disappointment for everybody. That's what we all expected, more than just a photo call in Alaska, some real practical steps. The two countries, Ukraine and Russia, have continued to bomb each other. And therefore that hasn't stopped, and it's going to continue. So I think it's a big disappointment for everybody that we reached a stage where we were before Alaska happened. And I'm not sure whether President Trump has got anything left in his top drawer, or whether these two countries are prepared to meet, because they are obviously determined to ensure that there is a continuation of this. Which is very, very disappointing.
Keith, we are seeing small encroachments of Russian troops further into Ukrainian territory. We also have seen statements coming from the likes of Sergei Lavrov saying there is no framework for this bilateral meeting that Donald Trump has pushed. With, of course, this grand Alaska meeting that happened along with Zelensky meeting in Washington, these muddy statements coming out of the Kremlin and from Russian officials. Do you think Vladimir Putin is just buying time here?
Thomas, you're right. I think he probably is. I don't think he had any intention of reaching an agreement with Donald Trump because he worked out at the end he had more to gain by the meeting in Alaska than anyone else. He was accepted, received, clapped onto the red carpet by the American president, and as a result of which he was welcomed back into the international fold. So it probably is a opportunity to buy some more time, and that throws the gauntlet back at the European nations, France, Germany, and the United Kingdom and Italy in particular. Are they prepared to do anything in order to take this process forward? What Donald Trump will do is, if there's no progress, he'll just wash his hands off the whole thing and find some other cause to pursue. But the people of Ukraine and Russia are left now with the vacuum. What is going to happen? How are we going to get to the peace that we desperately want? And everyone's taking a hardened position. President Zelensky is saying, I will not concede a millimeter of my territory. And President Putin saying, I will take what is mine. These are all Russian-speaking people. They want to be part of Russia. So that's exactly where we were when this whole conflict began.
Keith, thank you. You are staying with us to discuss further European updates. We move to another related development next, where France has summoned the Italian ambassador after Italy's Deputy Prime Minister, Matteo Salvini, challenged President Emmanuel Macron's call for European soldiers to be deployed in Ukraine after a potential post-war settlement. Salvini, a vocal critic of Macron, has made some statements. Let's take a listen in to what he said.
Assolutamente no, se vuole ci va Macron, ma lui da solo penso, perché neanche un francese lo seguirebbe. Sicuramente neanche un soldato italiano, questa è la mia posizione da vicepresidente del Consiglio, da ministro, da segretario della Lega, da genitori. I nostri figli non andranno a combattere in Ucraina.
The exchange marks the latest in a series of diplomatic tensions between Paris and Rome since Giorgia Meloni took power in 2022. France reminded the ambassador that such remarks undermined their historical relationship, especially as both nations remain committed to supporting Ukraine. Macron continues to push for stronger European involvement in Ukraine's defence. Keith joins us once again. Keith, if you can, go over the different stances that Italy and France have on this matter. Of course, Macron and Meloni's government both come from very different ends of the political spectrum, both part of the coalition of the willing. Could you explain this spat for us?
Well, this is a coalition government, Thomas. I don't think that Prime Minister Meloni has control over her Deputy Prime Minister. She can't tell him what to say. It's a coalition. And therefore, I would imagine the French government did tell her in advance that they were going to summon the Italian ambassador. Who knows what the tensions are in the coalition itself. There have always been tensions, of course, between France and Italy. Prime Minister Meloni has been very vocal about her criticism of what France does, in particular in Africa, to do with illegal migration. However, on Ukraine, they seem to be pretty united. And if you look at the coverage of the visit of the four leaders of Europe, together with Finland and the European Union, to Washington last week, there seemed to be absolute unity. So what France is basically saying is, don't speak out of turn, because we are all united as countries. We either go in together or not at all. And Mr. Salvini is saying, or Senor Salvini is saying, in Italian words, get lost. I think that's the translation of what he actually said. If you want to go and support Ukraine with troops on the ground, you go, but we're not going to go with you. So that's probably not the position of the Italian government, because otherwise, why did Prime Minister Meloni go to Washington last week? They were all pretty supportive of Ukraine, and it's very clear that they all want to do this in a concert together rather than separately. So what's disappointing about it from the coalition of the willings point of view is that even though the willing are willing to do these things, there are some in their governments who are not willing. And therefore you get this, the art of diplomacy is to summon an ambassador and give them a good dressing down and sending them away as a shot being fired, a diplomatic shot being fired, as opposed to actual physical shots being fired. But Matteo Salvini is quite an outspoken individual, and I don't think that anyone can muzzle him, even someone as charismatic and as clever as Giorgia Meloni. I think she just has to accept what he says, and all four of those nations, the four biggest nations in the European Union, working together with the EU to try and support Ukraine. I think that's probably why Macron has done this, to show that they are still united and strong in their support of President Zelensky.
Keith, thank you very much for that brilliant analysis, and thank you very much for taking the time to join us here on the programme. For our next story, we move over to the United States, where Kilmar Albrado Garcia, the Salvadorian man wrongly deported earlier this year, has been released from jail in Tennessee and is now on his way to Maryland. He was brought back to the US in June to face human smuggling charges after being mistakenly deported to El Salvador in March, despite a court order blocking his removal. Albrado Garcia reunited with his family on Friday after more than 160 days apart. He must remain in his brother's custody in Maryland under strict release conditions, including reporting to pretrial services and avoiding contact with MS-13 members. His lawyers say he is still far from safe, warning that ICE detention or deportation to a third country remains possible. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem has condemned his release, calling him a danger, while judges have ruled he must be allowed to prepare his defense in Maryland. Albrado Garcia has pleaded not guilty to the charges. We're now joined by Raymond Vickery, who is a former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Commerce. He joins us live from Washington, D.C. to discuss this story further. Raymond, this story, as we have said previously, has been going on for 160 days now. And finally, Kilmar Albrado Garcia has gone back to his family. However, he is not out of the woods yet, pleading not guilty to charges that he has been pushed upon by the Trump administration. Your thoughts, however, about how this situation might develop and the fact that he is indeed back home after being held for so long in that CCOT prison in El Salvador, Raymond?
Well, thanks very much for having me, Thomas. You know, democracy requires more than just voting. It requires an adherence to the rule of law, and it requires a respect for the individual and the person. As our Declaration of Independence says, all men are created equal and endowed with certain inalienable rights. In order for there to be order either nationally in a democracy or internationally, there has to be an adherence to the rule of law. Unfortunately, some nations explicitly have not recognized that in the past, Russia, China, and other authoritarians. The United States has traditionally, for almost 250 years, with lapses, been a beacon in the rule of law and adherence to the value of the individual. Unfortunately, President Trump and his administration have taken a full frontal assault on those basic values of a democracy in the United States. And one of the areas in which they've done that has been with Kilmer Abrego Garcia, whom they first designated as a member of a gang and said that he had to be deported him mistakenly, were ordered by the Supreme Court of the United States to bring him back, and finally, with some hesitation, got him back, but said that he would never see the light of day again, doubling down on the assault on the rule of law. Fortunately, the third branch of government, the judicial branch, has held in this instance and said, no, you do not have proof. You have not provided the man due process, and has ordered him released and returned to his family, awaiting for a due process trial to have a decision on trumped up charges that he was trafficking, evidently trumped up because there's nothing more than a traffic stop that we know of to support this allegation. So this is a very, very serious situation, because not only has the Trump administration doubled down once, they've doubled down twice, and now they're doing it again. What they say is that regardless of what the judge in Tennessee has ruled, that they're going to deport him to Uganda. Fortunately, the court's order gives a 3-day period in which Mr. Abrego Garcia can seek the intervention again of the court and try to provide due process. But make no mistake about it, this is a part of the Trump administration's attempt to change the form of government in the United States. One from checks and balances, separations of power, to an authoritarian approach in which law does not matter, but it is the will of the person at the top, namely President Trump and his administration, to be able to decide who has liberty and who has not. We have every expectation in the United States that our system will hold, but this is a very difficult situation in which we cry out for help to other democracies to support the rule of law and basic human values.
Raymond, just briefly, as we're running out of time, obviously you've said that the Trump administration has doubled down on this case multiple times, and even spoken to Nayib Bukele in the White House about the individual. So this is a hugely high-profile case. Is this a image-related issue now for Donald Trump, that if this man does now walk free, Donald Trump's administration in its entirety will see this as a loss?
Well, it's certainly an image issue for President Trump. He wants to be seen as the great man, the person who decides things. His approach is that of a real estate developer making a deal on Trump Tower or some other real estate, that he decides he must come out a winner. And if it is shown that the American system is not that it is one of checks and balances, of the rule of law, of an independent judiciary, then his status is diminished, not only to his adherents, but in his own mind. And he can't stand that. We've seen that time and time again as he seeks retribution against any center of power, any person who would try to rein in this image which he has created himself of the decider, the authoritarian, who doesn't need other people to help him.
Raymond Vickery, thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. Always a pleasure to speak to you. We now move over to Europe once again for a developing story where Spain is making significant progress in battling the wildfires that have devastated the country this month, burning through a record 403,000 hectares of land. While 13 fires remain active, officials say the situation is improving with fewer fires and weaker winds. Let's hear what the Director of Civil Protection had to say.
bajar la guardia porque estamos en un momento determinante con la climatología que todavía nos continúa siendo favorable para acabar de una vez por todas con el terrible sufrimiento que han provocado estos incendios. Hay ya muchos incendios controlados, estabilizados, pero todavía seguimos teniendo 13 incendios forestales activos en 3 comunidades autónomas y por lo tanto vamos a seguir con esta monitorización, con este seguimiento permanente 24 horas al día de la evolución de cada.
The worst hit regions have been Castile and Leon, and also Galicia. As firefighters continue to fight the blazes, political tension has emerged over accusations of mishandling of the response. Meanwhile, in Portugal, a firefighter has become the 4th fatality in the emergency. With wildfires worsening across Europe, experts warn that this intense fire season is just a reflection of larger global trends. Well, that's all that we have time for. We will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world. Thank you.